I wrote my first computer program in 1964, so yeah, I'm 100 years old, but that has a lot to do with the fact that the Russians put up a satellite called Sputnik, and all of a sudden in America there was a great panic that we were going to get attacked by Russians from space. So a bunch of kids were taken to a room, and we were taught to be Fortran programmers and machine language programmers. And I remember when I was 17, I was training 35 and 40-year-old engineers to help them adapt to a new world where we didn't need big, heavy power engineers. We needed people who could do microchip type stuff. So I had this amazing 8-year honeymoon with technology. And during that time, I wrote all the programs I could think of. I wrote games. I was doing online gambling, except it wasn't online and it wasn't really good and the programs didn't work. And then I came to Calgary in 1972 and I took a job here as a systems programmer for the University of Calgary. And the first job that I was given was to unmask a missionary unmasker. And that's how sounds kind of strange, but there was a guy going around posting everybody's passwords. And so I was given the job of figuring out about this. And this was kind of my fall from innocence with technology, because I realized, you know, there are some people out there doing bad things with technology as well as the people who are playing the games and having a lot of fun. So I went on to think more and more about that, and in 1984 wrote a CBC radio series called Crimes of the Future. And it got a lot of awards, and it was a brilliant series because we predicted identity theft, we predicted organ legging, the theft of bodily parts. We forgot to predict the internet. We never thought about that. And we predicted some crimes that never happened, like wireheading, where you would in fact directly stimulate your pleasure center, although I know there's a group down in Las Vegas that's working on exactly that same project now. So I came to this theory that maybe technology has good and bad points. Now I know if I tried to talk to you about computers and communication technology today, there'd be some people in this room who know more than I do, and you'd all be using Twitter to say, he's such a jerk, I know something better than he does. So I'm going to talk about something totally different. Okay, and the totally different thing is MRI. Now, how many of you have had an MRI? Okay, that's very good. I assume there are no MRI experts and the functional neuroanatomists in the room, so I'm safe on that one. There's a particular kind of MRI where they watch as your brain is operating and so on, and that's a very interesting one. There's actually one rather bizarre case that came out of Holland where two people, presumably slim young people, climbed inside an MRI machine and had sex. And they weren't watching their brains, they were actually watching a little bit lower down. And the article that was published about this was called Remarkable Discovery, the Penis is a Boomerang. Because in fact, just at the moment when it's doing its job, it does form a boomerang shape. So you've learned something today already. And I don't know if it's news you can use, but you tell me about it if you can. Functional MRI has a lot to do with taking the brain and analyzing where the blood goes to it. It's actually very new. The science behind it was only published in 1990, relies on all kinds of advances in physics, but essentially what they do is they try to watch what's going on. And it's become a routine tool in medical research. So here's one particular paper where they're talking about putting people in virtual reality environments to counteract chronic pain. And they actually show different centers of the brain and how they're activated. And the left-hand side is no VR, and the right-hand side is VR. So sure enough, they find that they can actually control certain kinds of pain using virtual reality environments, and they can prove it with this. You probably all know about Oliver Sacks, wrote that wonderful book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. If you haven't read it, essentially it's a bunch of clinical case histories, and one of them is a man who got all kinds of things wrong, so one day he tried to tear his wife's head off and put it on his head. Luckily, he wasn't very strong. He was an older gentleman, so he didn't rip her head off. But Sacks is now very interested in hallucinations, and he did, as a matter of fact, a TED Talk that had a lot to do with blind people and what they see. And he said some of them see handkerchiefs floating in space, and some of them see complete worlds that don't exist. And he was able to actually look at some of the functional MRI data and see what parts are activated. So the visual cortex, the fusiform gyrus or whatever. And so they actually are being able to do those studies. A lot closer to home, there's a gentleman at Mount Royal University who has been focusing on the left inferior frontal gyrus. And you all have one. Okay, that's important to know. You all brought it here today, and you're using it right now. And in fact, what you seem to use it for, or one of the things you use it for, is self-talk. So when you're talking to yourself, hopefully not aloud, but when you're going out there and making some kind of plan, you actually are activating this area. And Alan Moran from Mount Royal University made a meta-analysis and found that when you're doing things like self-recognition, like you look in the mirror in the morning, is that me? You don't really have to do a lot of activation. So these are the percentage of studies where the LIFG is activated. Certainly when you're making judgments about yourself, like am I a punctual person? Do I show up on time? That's called autobiography. Most of the studies show that area activated. And amazingly enough, when you're at rest and doing nothing, you're almost always telling yourself a story. So that's kind of an interesting conclusion that we can make from this type of data. Now, enter the villains, and this is my one stolen image in here because I can't draw, so I took an image off Dix.com, that's D-I-C-T-S, and here are some of the bad guys, okay? The bad guys are out there doing things. There are companies pushing fMRI as a lie detector, a foolproof, we know for sure what you're thinking, and so on. Now, there is some basis there. For example, if I don't think any of you are, but if you were a terrorist and you had been to a training camp in Pakistan, you might react in a certain way when you see photographs of that camp. So there are certainly people using it for that. But if you ask, did you embezzle that $1 million, lots of things go on in your brain, and fMRI is not necessarily going to be the foolproof lie detector. There was a case in the United States, very sad one, Brian Dugan, accused of murder, and his lawyer introduced evidence about his state of mind. Basically, in the United States, because of the death penalty, lawyers can introduce just about anything to try to save them. It didn't work in his case. He was condemned to death. But they basically were trying to say that certain things in his brain made it impossible for him to form the guilty mind to commit that murder in a legally culpable way. One of the most famous ones was during the U.S. presidential election. People were showing photos of Hillary Clinton and so on and studying how the brain reacted. And there was this huge controversy in the New York Times about people going, well, when we put up a picture of McCain, there's disgust that goes on. The disgust center is activated. Well, there is no disgust center in the brain. There are parts that might be associated with that. So we have these scientists making some wild claims. We also have the neuromarketers. There are people who study brains while you're watching TV commercials, and they make a lot of money from what they do, but we don't really know if the science is good. And then, of course, there's the U.S. military. Now, DARPA are the guys who gave us the internet, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, but they're also doing things like they're running a contest in which students are challenged to look at fMRI data of people who were subjected to watching a television sitcom, or 3.5 Men or 2.5 Men or whatever it's called, watching a season of it and then another season, and then they have to predict how they'll react to the third season. So it's actually a kind of student competition that goes on in Pittsburgh every year. There's a chip called LifeLog. Now, DARPA denies that they have this project. They admit that they funded it. The idea of LifeLog is it would be an implant somehow in your body that would record everything that you feel, everything that you see. Your entire life would be on that chip. And one of the initial applications was military pilots. So if somebody shoots something and it turns out to be a mistake, friendly fire, they can play back the episode. You're driving down the street, you have a fender bender, your lawyers could play back the episode. DARPA denies that they're funding this anymore. I think that's pretty conclusive proof that not only was it funded and successful, but they've taken it undercover now and are developing it. We do know that they have a project called Augmented Cognition that is an attempt to look into the brains of soldiers and figure out, are they too tired to fight? No matter how many drugs we give them, are they too tired to go out there? Or are they in such an angry state of mind that we shouldn't give them duties like interrogating a civilian because they're liable to do something terrible? Even the way we walk is being studied. I knew about this from some inside sources and couldn't talk about it for a long time. But as you can imagine, after 9/11, there were videos. Logan Airport has video cameras. Toronto has a huge number of video cameras. They actually have video of how the terrorists who ultimately did those things walked in the airport. And there's a thing called the terrorist gate. And I can't tell you what it is, but if you do certain things in the airport, suddenly you're going to find people holding you up against the wall because they're watching how you walk. And that was reported in 2008 in The Economist. Here's the problem. This is the letter that was sent to the New York Times after the whole Hillary Clinton and what she does to your brain flap. And in a nutshell, it says, look, it's not that simple. People want things to be simple, but neuroscientists say we can't really tell definitively whether a person is anxious, whether they feel love, connection, disgust, just by looking at that region. This is so because brain regions are engaged by many mental states, and there's not a one-to-one mapping. So that's the official letter from the scientists. No Nobel Prize winners yet, but some of them probably will be. The other problem about people is we have terrible judgment. Here's a Facebook posting. OMG, I hate my job, my boss is a total pervy wanker, blah, blah, blah. Firstly, don't flatter yourself. Secondly, you've worked here 5 months, then you work out that I'm gay, blah, blah, blah. So this is from the boss. She forgot that the boss was in her Facebook group, and sure enough, the last line is, I'll pop your P45 in the post. You can come in to pick up your stuff, and yes, I'm serious. So people just do dumb things, and if we give them fMRI, they'll do dumber things with it. They might also do nasty things. I love to show this example. Do not ever get arrested in Hernando County, Florida, because sheriffs are elected there, and Sheriff Should-Be Nugent really wants to prove that he's doing his job. He proves that by posting you on the internet if he arrests you. So we learned that this poor gentleman here, William Leo Wilbur, has been arrested for contempt of court and child support. Note that these are not convicted. These are people who have just been charged. But you're still shamed on the internet for 30 days, and in fact much longer if you make it into my presentation here. The problem with all this is that he doesn't discriminate, so there's one, and I have blocked out his face. I have blocked out part of his name. You can do the math. He was born in 1994. He was arrested in 2009. This is a child, a minor child who was outed on the internet as having perpetrated structured burglary, whatever that is. So the reality is people will do bad things with technology. That's the deep message that we need to think about. People will do horrible things with technology. This is a U.S. government employee named Susan Hallowell, as we never wanted to see her. This is her attempting deliberately to smuggle bombs and guns through the whole body scanning equipment. So that's what people look like. Nobody looks really nice. She's quite nice looking in real life, but not in this situation. The point is that people are devious. People, even with technology that we think will solve everything, it's not going to solve it. People will find other ways. An Israeli expert said he would find enough way to bring an explosive to bring down a 747 despite the best scanning technology. Also, we get into some strange uses. There's now home DNA testing. So if you really want to know who your daddy is, for sure, you can send some DNA in on a gene swab technology, and you'll get that result. But there's unintended consequences. A lot of people are finding out things they didn't want to know. There's even a group that is mating up on the internet who are the children of a sperm donor, I think donor 47, and they all now want child support, right? They're getting together because they have genetically determined that they have a common and very prolific father who, when he was a med student, donated quite regularly. And now all of his children are coming home to roost. IBM, to their credit, has decided that they will not use any genetic information, which can be quite serious information. If I know about your genome, I know about your brother, I know about your father and your children. So giving up your DNA is something you definitely should try to avoid doing. What IBM has said, we're not going to base any decisions on it. Immediately on sites like Slashdot, people said, oh great, IBM will now become the home for all the genetic cripples. And other people said it already is, but basically, IBM has taken a bold stand there, and I think a very, very good one. I am 100% certain, without any doubt, that fMRI technology will be horribly misused. And I will give you one piece of evidence. It's a website that luckily doesn't exist anymore. There's a map of Calgary. Those are people who have been flagged as rotten neighbors, people who leave out their trash, people who let their dog poop on you. This is a vigilante justice type of site that has been sitting out on the internet for about a year. Finally, it just kind of died from lack of money, I think, really, because who wants to pay for this information? But you have sex offenders, bad neighbors, and it's supposed to be good neighbors, but as you can tell, this is downtown Calgary, and I guess we don't have any good neighbors there. And that's what the site looked like. Watch your kids around this trailer, mean dog lady, things like that. This is what people will do. If we get to the stage where the fMRI is something you can carry around in your pocket and zap your friends with, look out, because you might learn a lot about what's going on in their minds. So as a bottom line, some predictions: the fMRI is going to get cheap, it can get discreet, it'll be as small as this little gizmo here, and people are going to be zapping our brains. What they conclude maybe is good, maybe is bad. We're going to see surprising uses. There will always be unanticipated uses. As we know, the pornography industry has driven most of the advances, and I mentioned what's going on in Las Vegas. If you want to know more, just type in the word teledildonics. You'll learn all about that. And we're going to need to make some important choices. So my key message to you is that with every technology, and I've shown you one today that is probably a novel technology to most of you, but so were computers when I started in 1964. I got on the New York subway with a printout, and people thought I was some sort of a lunatic, right? What's that thing you're reading there? fMRIs are expensive and are in the lab now, but they're going to get cheaper. We're going to have to make some very important social choices about where we allow them. You think, the cell phone camera in the gym locker room was an issue. Imagine when we can get inside of people's heads and start making conclusions about what they're thinking. So I want to close with my absolute favorite all-time ad. Someone ran this in the newspaper. Free to a good home, beautiful 6-month-old male kitten, or handsome 32-year-old husband. Funny, good job, doesn't like cats, said he goes where the cat goes. Call Jennifer, come and see both, and decide which one you'd like. Thank you very much.